Now, what do you remember about your religious education at school? Were you taught about different faiths, different cultures, or was it Bible study and hymns all the way? Well, Charlie Ray is a journalism student in Milton Keynes. Recently, he wrote an article for the Milton Keynes Citizen on why he believes religious education is outdated and irrelevant to many teenagers today.
I said in my article I'd be teaching religious studies in like a citizenship lessons, and I still believe that's the case, but I think maybe mix it with some philosophy, some politics, and get a more rounded view of some more academically relevant subjects, today, right now. Because politics, if you're an atheist, in an ever-growing atheist country, religion is going to have, it'll still have an influence, but it'll have less of an influence as the years go on. Whereas politics will still happen, rightly or wrongly, politics will affect you.
Mohammed Ansar is a political and social commentator regularly appearing on the telly and on radio. He's a public speaker and visiting lecturer on Islamophobia, Islam in contemporary Britain and theology, and he believes passionately in religious education and does a lot of work within schools. I spoke to him when he was in St Albans earlier this week.
Religious education in England and Wales sits outside of the national curriculum. It has done for decades, actually. And it's partly a hangover from when it used to be called religious instruction, and it used to be run by, and education was essentially all done by the church.
Yeah.
Then those reforms came in the 1944 Education Act, and then again in the late 80s and early 90s. So religious education is, if you like, managed separate to the national curriculum, and is every local authority is responsible for having an agreed syllabus on how religious education is taught in their schools, and that is supported by something called a SACRE, which is a Standing Advisory Council for Religious Education, which every local authority has to have by statute. Traditionally, state schools and faith schools will all usually subscribe to the agreed syllabus. However, some faith schools will decide to do religious education in perhaps a slightly varied way.
What do you think about the way it is taught? Because obviously it has changed.
The religious education that I see, and I get to visit dozens of schools on RE monitoring visits. I mean, I'm a real passionate advocate for religious education in England and Wales, and the way we teach it today is fantastically exciting. It's incredibly compelling and incredibly relevant. We live in a multi-religious, multicultural society, and religious education is the only topic in school where young people will be able to sit down and talk about things like 9/11 and terrorism and the nature of God and the nature of a secular society and belief, and is it rational to believe in a God and religion? Is it better to not believe? Where they can actually weigh up the evidence, and they can do something which we like to call a contextual inquiry. And so actually they can look at the deep information held within religions, and they can actually debate it and discuss it amongst themselves. There's no other subject that provides that forum and that space in today's curricula. And I think that is the most compelling argument that there can be for continuing to teach religious education.
Charlie, the student who I spoke to earlier, one of the quotes from the article that he wrote in the Milton Keynes local paper was, he says, what sort of example are we setting to our children by introducing them to the socially backward views of many religions? Now, I asked him to explain that, and he said, well, if we're trying to preach open-mindedness to our children, how can we do that when there are things like such as, women being unable to be bishops in the Anglican Church, same-sex marriage, those kind of things? Those two things are at odds. What do you think about that?
We live in a society which is incredibly diverse. I mean, we have, globally, some in the region of, a billion Catholics, a billion from the Protestant tradition, a best part of 2 billion Muslims, a billion Hindus. Religion is here, and it's here to stay, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. And I think some people who have got vested interests, who are either... There is a strain of very aggressive humanism or atheism. Some people would even call it evangelical humanism or atheism, where actually they're going out to try and convert people and quite aggressively undermine religion. And I think that's a very sad and negative thing. Religion plays a fantastically important and relevant role in today's society. There are really exciting and interesting debates about what is the balance between religion and what is the balance between a secular society, and what part should religion play within society, within our legislature, within our executive. What is the balance? And actually, there are some very relevant discussions going on where people are looking around and saying, well, look at the problems that we've had with our political class recently. Look at the problems that we've had with our economic system, with some of the policies around banking and governance. And actually, are we able to make good moral decisions now as people? And religion, the argument for religion says, well, actually, we do need to have maybe a return to morality to try and plug this morality gap. And so actually, one of the interesting things we've seen is during over the last census, period covered over the last census, we saw that, albeit there had been a decline in what you'd call white British Christianity, all the other main religions grew in number.
That is interesting.
And it's not enough to argue, and it's probably not enough to argue, Helen, that it's from immigration, because we know that there have been tens of thousands of people converting to other religions, including Islam. And so religion is here in Britain. And
but there were more people, sorry to interrupt you, but there were more people within the census, and this is what Charlie brought up as well, who consider themselves to have no faith. So should that be taken into account in terms of what we teach children at school?
Absolutely. Religion is not just about religion. We should be far more inclusive, far more encompassing, and talking about religion and belief. Many of the agreed syllabuses or agreed syllabi, which are covered by schools and colleges and secondary schools, talk about philosophy for children. They introduce the concept of critical thinking. They introduce the idea of making inquiries, thinking critically, evaluating evidence. But moving forward to an enlightened society where people have more open dialogue, are more inclusive, and have a more interest and have increased interest in each other's lives and what they believe and how they move forward, isn't going to happen if we remove religious education from schools. Actually, what we need to do is we need to professionalise religious education. We need to talk about the contribution it plays to a diverse society, and an increasingly diverse society, because that is one thing we have found during the last census, that we do live in an increasingly diverse society. And religion plays a phenomenally important role for millions of people on a day-to-day basis. To have a more enlightened society, we need to have a better discussion and a more professionalised debate about what role does religion play. And part of that debate isn't going to be to exclude religion.
Mohammed Ansar is a political and social commentator who believes passionately in religious education in schools.